in a stunning development that has blindsided global intelligence agencies. Tehran has just announced the partial reopening of the Strait of Hormuz for the first time. Since the outbreak of full-scale hostilities with the United States and Israel, this move comes as the global economy teeters on the edge of a total energy collapse. With Brent crude reaching $95 a barrel and gas prices hitting historic highs across the United States. For over a week, the Strait of Hormuz had been a logistical black hole, inhibited by Iranian naval mines and the constant threat of fast attack boats. But this morning, in a broadcast translated into 6 languages, the Iranian Foreign Ministry declared that they would no longer target non-belligerent vessels, provided they are not transporting American or Israeli military assets, while the Trump administration continues to demand an unconditional surrender. This strategic opening suggests that a secondary diplomatic track may be gaining traction behind the scenes. Analysts point to the recent secret meeting in Muscat between Omani mediators and American envoys as the likely origin of this de-escalation. However, the situation remains incredibly volatile. Even as the first Greek and Chinese tankers began their transit under the watchful eyes of the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford, the skies over Tehran remain filled with the smoke of burning oil refineries. The United States military has already struck over 3,000 targets. But the decentralization of Iran's command structure, the so-called Mosaic Defense, means that one provincial commander could still trigger a regional catastrophe by ignoring the stand-down order. The opening of the strait is not just an economic gesture. It is a test of sovereignty. By allowing trade to resume, Iran is attempting to peel away the international support for the U.S.-led coalition. If energy flows return to normal, the pressure on Washington to accept a ceasefire instead of an unconditional surrender will grow exponentially from European and Asian allies who are desperate for economic stability. This is a high-stakes gamble by the new supreme leader Mojtaba Khamenei, who is trying to prove he can navigate a war that killed his father while keeping the pillars of the Islamic Republic from collapsing entirely. The world is watching to see if this is the beginning of the end of the conflict, or merely a tactical pause in a much longer war of attrition. The Pentagon remains deeply skeptical of Tehran's intentions, with military officials pointing to the unprecedented concentration of American naval power now converging on the region. The arrival of a third nuclear supercarrier, the USS George H.W. Bush, which is currently steaming across the Atlantic, will soon join the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford to project overwhelming force. This triple carrier punch is designed to ensure that even if the strait is technically open, it is the United States Navy that ultimately dictates the flow of global energy. Since the start of Operation Epic Fury on February 28, 2026, United States forces have already destroyed over 40 Iranian warships and decimated more than 3,000 targets. Yet the Iranian regime has proven surprisingly resilient. Despite the loss of the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was eliminated in the opening daylight strike of the war, the Islamic Republic's command structure has not completely disintegrated. Instead, the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, doubled down on the so-called Mosaic Defense, a military doctrine that divides the country into 31 autonomous units capable of continuing the fight independently, even if the central leadership is paralyzed. Mojtaba, an even more rigid hardliner than his father, is leading an interim council that views any step toward peace as a potential trap. This decentralized system has allowed Iran to continue firing ballistic missiles and drones, despite losing 80% of its air defense systems. Furthermore, reports indicate that Russia is providing real-time intelligence through its space-based surveillance apparatus, helping Iranian units locate American naval vessels and military bases. This assistance was a primary factor in the tragic drone strike on a makeshift facility in Kuwait that killed 6 United States service members from the state of Iowa. The human cost of this conflict is becoming impossible to ignore, especially after the devastating strike on a girls' primary school in the town of Minab. That left more than 140 people dead, while the Trump administration continues to insist on unconditional surrender. The Iranian foreign minister said Abbas Araghchi has publicly rejected any deals that do not involve a permanent end to the war. As tankers begin to navigate the narrow channels of the strait once again, the threat of a full-scale regional war looms larger than ever, with Israel calling up 70,000 reservists and preparing for a military campaign that could last for many weeks. Inside the corridors of power in Tehran, a shadow civil war is erupting between the civilian administration and the remnants of the military elite. Just hours after President Masoud Pezeshkian issued a public apology to Gulf neighbors for the strikes on their territory, the Iranian military command issued a sharp contradiction, vowing that the attacks on United States and Israeli interests will only intensify. This internal fracture suggests that the Interim Leadership Council is losing its grip on rogue commanders, who are now operating under a fire-at-will doctrine. In response, President Donald Trump has discarded all diplomatic niceties on social media that there will be no deal with Iran except for an unconditional surrender. He has specifically warned that the United States is now considering areas for complete destruction and certain death that were not previously on the target list. While the political war of words escalates, the economic battlefield is becoming a slaughterhouse for global investors. Stock markets in South Korea and Japan have seen historic crashes, with some triggering circuit breakers after 10% drops. Despite the partial opening of the Strait of Hormuz, maritime insurance rates have spiked by as much as 50%. As brokers recognize that the waterway remains a graveyard for those without military protection, the cost of this conflict has already ballooned to nearly $4 billion for the United States in just its first 100 hours. This fiscal strain is being compounded by reports that Russia is providing Iran with the coordinates of American assets through its space-based surveillance. This intelligence was likely used in the surgical strike against the United States Embassy in Riyadh and the destruction of $4 billion THAAD systems across the region. The psychological impact of these losses is forcing the Pentagon to rethink its surface naval strategy. The USS Abraham Lincoln reportedly moved 1,000 kilometers away from the Iranian coast following claims of a successful naval drone strike. This strategic repositioning, though downplayed by officials, signals that the United States is struggling to counter the low-cost, high-volume drone swarms that Iran continues to launch at a drizzle pace. Even on the high seas, the brutality is absolute. The United States reportedly used a torpedo to sink the Iranian naval ship Dina off the coast of Sri Lanka, refusing to render aid to the drowning crew as the war enters its second week. A disturbing pattern known as the drizzle strategy has emerged from the mountains of western Iran. While the initial waves of the conflict saw massive ballistic missile salvos, the Iranian military has shifted to a slow, steady pace of launches designed to exhaust the world's most advanced defense systems. Each Iranian drone, costing a mere $20,000, forces the United States and Israel to fire interceptors that cost millions. It's creating a fiscal and logistical nightmare for the Pentagon. Estimates indicate that the first 4 days of the campaign alone cost Washington nearly $11 billion, with over $5 billion spent on missile interceptors. This attrition has become so severe that President Trump has ordered defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Boeing to quadruple production schedules as American stockpiles of Patriot and THAAD missiles reach critical lows. In Tehran, the physical reality of the war is taking a bizarre and toxic turn. Heavy bombardment of oil refineries has released millions of gallons of crude into the city's infrastructure, which has mixed with seasonal rainfall to create a lethal black rain. The streets of the capital are now literal rivers of fire, as ignited oil flows through the sewage systems, turning the once vibrant metropolis into a landscape straight out of a nuclear winter. Despite these apocalyptic conditions, the Interim Council in Tehran has not blinked. Instead, they have weaponized the international media, pointing to the ruins of the school in Minab, where over 100 girls were killed, To paint the United States and Israel as war criminals? The strategic logic of opening the Strait of Hormuz is now becoming clear. It is a lure. By allowing some traffic to pass, Iran is forcing the United States to commit its navy to dangerous escort duties in narrow waters saturated with naval drones and silent diesel submarines. The Iranian military is waiting for a single mistake, a single American warship to be trapped or hit, to collapse the fragile domestic support for the war in the United States. While the Trump administration brags of air supremacy, the persistence of the Iranian missile threat proves that technological dominance is not the same as victory. The world is no longer asking who has the bigger army, but rather, who can survive the longest in a region that has become a pressure cooker for the entire planet? The fragile peace in the Strait of Hormuz is being tested by a complex web of internal Iranian politics and aggressive American posturing. While President Masoud Pezeshkian has publicly apologized to Gulf nations for the waves of missile and drone strikes, calling for a return to diplomacy, the reality on the ground tells a much darker story. The Iranian military command has essentially sidelined the presidency, declaring that any de-escalation is conditional on neighbors, preventing the United States and Israel from using their territory for attacks. This split within the regime has created a lethal uncertainty for commercial shipping, even as tankers consider moving through the 21-mile-wide choke point. They face a landscape where more than 40 Iranian warships have already been vaporized by American fire. Yet thousands of naval mines and fast attack boats remain operational. President Donald Trump has seized on these internal Iranian divisions, claiming that the Islamic Republic has effectively surrendered to its neighbors due to the relentless pressure of Operation Epic Fury. He has signaled that the United States is prepared to strike even harder, moving past military facilities to target the very groups of people responsible for the regime's survival. This escalation comes as Israeli forces increase their own air campaign, recently hitting the headquarters of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Tehran, the same site where the massacre of thousands of protesters was organized earlier this year. Despite the loss of at least 40 top commanders and the supreme leader, the regime continues to project a defiant front, warning that the entry of American escorts into the Persian Gulf will only result in those ships ending up at the bottom of the sea. The economic shockwaves of this standoff are hitting global powers with brutal force. Qatar, the world's main gas exporter, has shut down operations, causing natural gas prices in Europe to surge by more than 50%. For India, the crisis is existential, as 55% of its crude imports and half of its liquefied natural gas are linked to the Gulf region, with buffer stocks calculated to last only 20 to 25 days. The weakening of the rupee and rising trade deficits are creating a domestic crisis for New Delhi. This is no longer just a war of missiles. It is a war of global endurance, where the price of oil and the flow of water are as critical as the number of bombers in the sky. The opening of the Strait of Hormuz may provide a temporary relief for global energy markets, but it does not signal a permanent end to the war of attrition. The United States remains locked in a race to see whose resources will be exhausted first. Whether it is Iran's ballistic missile launchers or America's expensive Patriot interceptor stockpiles. Even with thousands of targets hit, Iranian military units are operating under a weapons-free mode where individual commanders act without central coordination. This decentralization makes a diplomatic ceasefire nearly impossible because the United States has eliminated the very leadership it would need to negotiate with. President Trump continues to face significant domestic pressure, as even his own base has labeled this as stupid foreign war without a clear strategy or exit plan. The regional landscape is further complicated by the emergence of Mojtaba Khamenei as the new supreme leader, a figure known to be even more confrontational and less willing to seek a deal with the West. Under his command, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is likely to transition from a familiar religious governing structure to a harsher military dictatorship. Simultaneously, the shadow of Russia and China looms over the battlefield, as these powers continue to provide Iran with the strategic and financial lifelines necessary to sustain its resistance. While the United States may have achieved tactical supremacy in the air, it has failed to trigger the internal revolution it expected. Instead, the bombardment of schools and infrastructure has hardened the resolve of the Iranian people, turning the supreme leader into a martyr for the community across the Middle East. As the conflict enters this dangerous new phase, the risk of a full-scale regional configuration remains high. Hezbollah and the Houthis continue to wait for the order to fully activate their arsenals, which could turn the Mediterranean and the Red Sea into active combat zones. For now, the world remains trapped in the fog of war, where official statements from Washington, Tel Aviv, and Tehran often conceal more than they reveal. Whether the opening of the strait is a genuine off-ramp or a strategic trap is a question that will be answered in the coming days, as the global economy and the lives of millions hang in the balance of a war that no one seems able to stop.